What's happening, guys? It's DK Priori, and if you watched the first episode of the new series Let's Try Linux, you might remember that I mentioned that I was doing this all through virtual machines, and you might remember that I also mentioned I'd do a video showing you sort of a step-by-step guide to how I set up virtual machines running Linux. So I use VMWARE Workstation 15 Player. You can use Oracle VirtualBox. I used to use that, but recently it's not been meshing too well with Windows 10. It's been causing me all sorts of problems. I'd struggle to set up a virtual machine, and then when I finally get it set up, once I restart, I can't boot the virtual machine back up again. It throws all sorts of obscure error messages at me that people in the forums can't even seem to figure out. So I just abandoned that. I've not had any problems with Workstation 15, so I'm going to run with it. So I'll show you how I do my installations of a virtual machine through this. So first, and before I start, you'll notice that it's kind of self-explanatory, but there are a couple of tweaks I like to make things more stable, and there are a couple of points that you will need to be aware of. So create a new virtual machine is the first step. Check installer disk image file, ISO, and browse to a folder where you've got your Linux distribution ISO images. I've got a few here. We're going to be trying all of these out for the series, but for this instance we're going to use Linux Mint 19.3 Cinnamon. So load that up, hit next. In this instance, this is 19.3, so and Linux Mint isn't listed here, so it's other Linux 5.x or later kernels 64-bit, unless you have a PC before 2007, in which case it'd be 32-bit, but those are a dying breed nowadays, so you're probably using a 64-bit system. So select that, hit next. Oh, and by the way, you can just Google the distribution you want to use. So literally hit Linux Mint in Google, go to the web page, download, and whichever flavor you want. XFCE is the lightest and the most stable. Mate is, well, Cinnamon is the sort of higher spec, more feature-rich flavor, and Mate is basically the middle ground between XFCE in terms of performance and Cinnamon in terms of features. So I've got Cinnamon, hit 64-bit, download the ISO, save it, and then load it up as we did in those previous steps. So once you've selected that, name your virtual machine. Oops. I'm going to call it Mint 19.3 Cinnamon. Hit next. I like to store a virtual disk as a single file rather than split it. I have no intentions of moving my virtual disk to another device. That's quite an obscure feature when you're working on a home desktop anyway. So I just store it as a virtual disk file. You want your disk size, it can be whatever you want really. It'll default to the minimum recommended size, which in this case is 8 gig. I'm actually going to take it up to 20. 20. Oh my god. I'm going to take it up to 20. You'll see why later on in the video. So that'll create that virtual disk of 20 gig, and that'll read from my SSD. Now, look at that. It's using the base requirements in terms of random access memory. 768 meg, that's not good enough. I'm going to pump it up to 4 gig because that's what we did the Ubuntu video at, and until I start messing around with KDE Plasma, I'm going to keep it at 4 gig. That should be plenty. So put that slider up to whatever memory you want. You could go all the way up to your maximum amount of RAM that you've got installed. On this rig, I've got 16 gig of RAM, so I could take it up to 16 if I wanted, just by moving the slider up. Once you've set your memory, hit close. You'll notice now that memory's changed to 4 gig or 4096 meg. Finish. And it'll pop up here. So we want to hit play virtual machine. Keep everything as I would recommend keeping everything as it is for now. Hit start Linux Mint. Now, what we've got here with Linux Mint is a CD-ROM image. So the virtual machine is basically acting like I've got a disk running in the rig and it's reading from the disk, which means we're not going to be able to get the most out of this virtual machine. You'll see in a moment why that will be the case. If I maximize the screen, it's basically going to be that big. There's nothing I can change the resolution by popping through here, but it's not going to read my native resolution from my host PC. So it's never going to fit. So head over to install Linux Mint. Now, you will not have to do this for every distribution. This is just some of them. Some of them act this way because they allow you to safely test a distribution without doing any writing to your host system. So select your language. I'm going to select English UK. Don't really need to bother with any of that. So just leave it as English UK. Obviously, if you're in the US or any other nation, do that. Now you'll be prompted with this option: install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware, Flash, MP3 and other media. Some is proprietary. I'm not going to do that at this stage. If I want to do any of that, I'll do it later. So I'll just hit continue without checking that box. Erase disk and install Linux Mint. This will only install to your virtual disk. Do not worry about it wiping the disk for your host system. This will only affect your virtual disk. Another reason why we set it as a single file, because this will be much faster. Hit install now. It will just confirm that it's going to alter some of the partitions or alter the partition on the virtual disk, so don't worry about that. Hit continue and the installation will start. Now, there's a good reason why we do it this way, and it's because, as it is with Linux Mint reading as a CD-ROM, it locks that drive whenever you're using the virtual machine. So you can't eject the CD drive, which means you can't install something called VMWARE Tools, which is what we want to get the most out of this virtual machine. So I select my location. Just set your name and your password. I leave it as require me to log in so that when I boot up the virtual machine I have to log in. You can encrypt the home folder if you wish. and now it's just going to go through and do its thing. So we ran into some issues trying to install VMWARE tools, which is what we need to make our virtual machine more efficient, to get it to be a properly full screen experience instead of this little diddy box. What I did was I mounted the VMWARE tools, which you do by going to Player, Manage, Install VMWARE tools. That'll then bring the disk up as the CD-ROM. Then I navigated within that CD-ROM, dragged out this VMWARE tools package, and then I dragged out of that VMWARE tools distrib, dragged those both onto the desktop, found that file location, which is /home/dk priori desktop VMWARE tools distrib VM, and what I did was I ran a superuser do command, VMware install.pl, hit enter, enter my password, and now we get a bunch of these options. So I'm just going to keep hitting enter. Just keep hitting enter. Do you want this program to invoke the command for you now? Definitely yes. Yep. Just hit yes to everything. Or no in this case. Do you want common agent CAF? No. Just keep everything as default. And that is done. So exit the terminal. And then what we're going to do, I'm going to just close everything down. Close tabs, close all, hit, that's log out, my bad, restart. Let's go up into enter full screen mode, and there we go. We have got our virtual machine running Linux Mint up and ready to go. So there you have it. That is a step-by-step guide on what I did to install a Linux distribution through VMWARE Workstation 15, and a bit more of a detailed guide on installing the VMWARE Tools application to get the virtual machine running as it should, basically. Not all distributions are like that. The Ubuntu one, I didn't have to do any of that. VMWARE Tools installed whilst the operating system was installing, so I didn't need to mess around like that, but got a little sidesteps there. I hope the video made it clear on what you have to do. You just have to basically, like I said, we'll run through it quickly again. Manage, install VMWARE Tools. That'll say install rather than reinstall. That'll bring up the disk. Navigate to the disk, drag that to your desktop. Once you've got that in your desktop, enter, drag that to your desktop. Once you've got that, copy the directory, go into your terminal, superuser do command, paste that in, then // and find out the name of the file, VMware install.pl. Hit enter. It'll ask you for your password and just keep hitting enter, keep everything to a default, restart the system, and you're good to go. So I hope that's some help. I hope it's not too daunting, and I hope as I progress through this series of Let's Try Linux, you'll follow with me and try some distributions. So I've been DK Priori. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.